Is my audio on right now?
You're on and we can hear you absolutely clearly.
Well, it is such a pleasure and a joy for me to be here with you folk today. And I have to be honest, I recognize only one face, Sunil Robert. And he was in the first Apologetics and Spiritual Disciplines training seminar in 1990. I can't remember whether it was Bangalore or Hyderabad, but it was one of those two places. And so it is just a real pleasure and an honor for me. As our brother mentioned, I became a follower of Christ through the Ministry of Youth for Christ in 1963 at the Youth for Christ summer camp in Missouri. And of course, at that time, I was in my first year of undergraduate engineering at IIT Delhi. And then in 1967, was involved in TAMI Club for those 4 years. And in 1967, I moved to Boston. I did my graduate work in mechanical engineering at MIT. And in 1969, I moved to Toronto, Canada, where I started working with Atomic Energy of Canada. In 1971, I got married to Shamla. Shamla and Ravi, my longtime friend, became my brother-in-law that day. And of course, it's been very sad to see his loss recently. I was telling someone, how many times can you say of someone, he was my friend for 69 years. He was my fellow traveler in the Christian faith for 57 years. He was my brother-in-law for 48 years. And he was a colleague in Christian ministry for 40 years. So it was a very, very unusual relationship, and I miss him very much. But so thankful because we had so many joyful memories of our times in YFC India together. And then in 1971, right after I got married, I started worshiping in Rexdale Alliance Church, which was a church of the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Canada. And in 1980, after 11 years of working with Atomic Energy, the pastor of the church resigned and asked whether I would become the preaching pastor of the church in Rexdale. And so that's where I was for 16 years. And then when he retired, another 19 years, I was senior pastor. So for 36 years, I had the privilege of pastoring at Rexdale, and 9 years as a layman. So 45 years in just one church. That gave me a deep, deep love for the bride of Christ as well. And I've never lost that. Since retirement in 2016, it has allowed me the privilege of focusing on two things that I love to do, which is preaching, of course, studying and preaching, and then mentoring the next generation. That has been my huge passion. We have two children, a daughter who's 47 and a son who's 44. And my son, his name is Vijay, after 11 years of working in the corporate world, in the business time, he became pastor of a church that we in Rexdale planted. So he is now the lead pastor of a church about 15 miles away from here. And we actually worship in that church. And then my daughter, she has each of them has 3 children. So we have 6 grandchildren. Our oldest grandchild, Rebecca, is just graduated from university with a degree in nursing. And our youngest one is 10 years old. So they are the joy of our lives. And so it is such an incredible honor and a privilege for me to share with you. And you know, as I was preparing and rehearsing this message, I was struck by the timeliness of this text, because I will be 75 in a few months in October. And I needed that reminder to continue pressing on as much as anybody else. And so I appreciate the privilege that God sovereignly orchestrates these things to be able to speak to me, first of all, before I can speak to anyone. So you all know the text really well, and it's on the overhead for you. I know nothing about technology, so somebody else is responsible for putting all the slides. Otherwise, you can just listen. The text, Philippians chapter 3, verses 12 to 14. Not that I have already obtained this or I'm already perfect, but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. The first and most important thing to notice about this text is how Paul actually views his conversion. Usually we tend to think of our conversion as the day when we responded to an invitation. For me, it was January 11th, 1963, and May 21st, 1963, for real, at the summer camp. And yes, there was definitely that element of our personal response to it. But Paul doesn't see it that way. He sees his conversion, if you will, as Christ taking a hold of him. This is a very unusual verb here because it is used twice. Paul says here, I press on to make it my own because Christ has made it my own. That's an interesting word. It's the same word. It is translated in 2 different ways. When it is applied to Jesus, the idea is of someone who's running after somebody else to lay a hold of them. So Paul says, Jesus pursued me and ran after me and got a hold of me. And he said, now I am running after, not Christ. He said, I am running after it to make it my own, to lay a hold of it. What is the it that Paul is talking about? It is the very purpose for which Jesus ran after him. So when Paul sees his conversion, he says, no, it's not primarily some choice that I made. He said, Jesus came after me and pursued me relentlessly and got a hold of me for his purposes. And now from that time on, I am running after that purpose to get a hold of it. And this is something that is completely consistent with the scriptures. Paul probably learned that from one of the apostles, because in John chapter 15, verses 15 and 16, we see Jesus, and this will be on the overhead as well for you. Jesus is talking to his disciples. They've had the upper room meal, and now they're walking. No longer do I call you servants, he said, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I've heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask in my name, he may give it to you. Now, it's interesting. I grew up in a country, and many of you in India, a place where people have servants. Because people are many, servants are available, much more so than here. I used to say to people in India, you can have 5 servants and no car. Here you can have 5 cars but no servant, overseas. But here's the difference. What is the main difference between a servant and a friend? A servant simply does whatever their master or mistress tells them. They don't have any understanding of why I've been told to sweep this garage, wash this car, clean the washroom. I don't know. They just obey orders. But a friend is like a son or a daughter in the business. They're not just employees. And employees in a business just simply punch the clock, put in their 35 hours, and can hardly wait to leave. Whereas the son or a daughter in the business will stay on for long hours after quitting time, because they understand what their father's or mother's big picture is. They understand where all the individual little orders and tasks fit into the big picture. And that's what Jesus is saying. He said, I have made known to you everything that the Father has shown me. I have made known to you. I have revealed the Father's agenda to you, he said. That's what he says. He said, everything I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You're no longer servants just to obey detached orders here and there. You are my friends. You are like my sons and daughters. You now understand the Father's heart, and you now understand why I have chosen you to accomplish it. So basically, here, if you want to summarize these verses, what Jesus is saying is, you have been chosen by me, you have been seized by me, and that's what Paul said, Christ came after me. I have now revealed to you the Father's agenda. I have elevated you from the status of servants to friend. I have now commissioned you unto fruitfulness. That's the whole idea behind conversion. That it is not some choice that we made. It is Jesus running after us, choosing us, seizing us, revealing the Father's agenda to us, commissioning us, sending us forth to be fruitfully employed. And that is the it that the Apostle Paul now says, I am now running after to lay a hold of this for which Jesus has commissioned me. And notice that the primary verb in this passage is to press on. Twice he says press on. But the participles, and if you remember your English grammar, participles govern the verb. So there are 2 participles, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. These are the 2 participles that govern the pressing on. First of all, forgetting what is behind. There is a right and a wrong way of looking to the past. Today, we have had a beautiful celebration of the past, and it has brought me so many joyful memories of my time with YFC and also the time that Ravi and I spent together as well. It can almost move me to tears. And that is the right kind of looking back. You are not looking back in order simply to focus on the good old days and just get paralyzed by the terrible days that we live in and keep longing for those days. No, that's not what, that's the wrong kind of looking back. It's a kind of looking back that says, okay, I've done my bit. I'm now 60. I'm now 70. I can coast now. I played my part. Now it's for the young ones to take care of. That's not the kind of looking back The right way to look back is, okay, there was God. This is how he started in my life. These were the beginnings that I had. I was chosen for this purpose. Now I look forward. So when Paul says forgetting what is behind, he's not talking about the kind of remembrance that we are doing today. He's talking about the kind of remembrance that says, okay, I can now relax. I can sit back. If anybody had the right to sit back and relax, it was the Apostle Paul. When he wrote to the Philippians, he was in jail. He had probably had 20 years of the most spectacular ministry anyone has ever had. He had suffered tremendously for Jesus. And he could be excused to sit back and say, surely I have paid my dues. He said, no, that's the wrong kind of looking back. The right kind of looking back is understanding that Jesus Christ took a hold of me for his purpose. He has revealed the Father's agenda, and now I press forward. So the second participle is straining. How do I press forward? Forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. And that word straining, it carries the whole idea of exertion, not kind of leaning into the future kind of haphazardly, but pressing on. One of the most beautiful illustrations I saw about this was in the 2008 Olympics. You might remember that Michael Phelps of the US, his goal was to win 8 gold medals at that time. And he almost didn't, because in the one event, he was a clear winner in 7 of the 8 events. In the 200-meter breaststroke, there was a Hungarian man, I forgot his name was Laszlo something or the other. And they were just going neck and neck and neck and neck to it. Actually, but Phelps won. But actually, if you remember the close-up, Laszlo's finger actually touched the end of the pool that infinitesimal 100th of a second before. The camera showed it. But it didn't register the automatic one. Whereas when Phelps touched it 100th of a second later, in one sense, it triggered it, because Phelps was straining forward at the moment where maybe Laszlo let up a tiny, tiny bit on that pressing forward, and that made all the difference. I've never forgotten that. When Paul says, I press forward, I strain forward, is to put maximum pressure to keep moving forward. So any backward look is only to help me strain more. So that's what he means. The central verb is to press on. And the key idea of that pressing on is running after in order to lay a hold of it. That's what he's doing. And what are the 2 participles that govern that verb? No looking back to slow down. Looking back only to say, wow, that was God's beginning in my life. I am going to continue. So, and Paul says, 2 verses before this, I haven't arrived yet. I mean, if that man could say, I have not yet arrived, what about you and me? We don't down tools at any stage in our life. So what that says to us is, this is how we need to see our conversion. We don't see our conversion primarily as some decision that we made to follow Jesus, although it is certainly true. But before we could do that, in fact, before the program started today, there was an instrumental playing that Jesus, I love you because he first loved me. We see conversion as Jesus running after us, laying a hold of us for his purposes. We are no longer servants, we are friends. Now you might say, isn't that just semantics? What is the real difference? After all, did I respond? Did Christ get a hold of me? Here's the difference. If we see our conversion primarily as some choice that we made to follow Jesus, Jesus and his mission and his purposes will always remain one among many other choices we have made. My career, my hobbies, my relationships, and Jesus. So he gets his portion, and then other people get the other portion. This leads to a very fragmented life, a compartmentalized Christianity, where Jesus, okay, I put in my work for him, I show up for 2 hours here, or I serve on this board, or I preach this sermon, and then I do whatever else, other things I do. But if we do not see our relationship with Jesus as some choice we made, but him choosing us, then every other choice that we make in life gets integrated under the purposes of Christ choosing us. It's the difference between a fragmented and an integrated life. In a fragmented life, Jesus remains one among many other choices, and he gets a little bit of our time, a little bit of our money, a little bit of our energy, a little bit, maybe not even a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, but not all of it. Whereas if we see our conversion as Jesus taking a hold of us, then every other choice that we make is subsumed. So my marriage is subsumed under my choice. And One of the advice I give to younger couples is that long before you ever become married and select your life partner, you need to settle what Jesus' call is upon your life. So you choose somebody who's in harmony with that call in our life. Our money, how I spend my money, how I spend my time, how I treat people at work, how I behave in the church on board meetings and annual meetings and whatnot, how I live out in the neighborhood, how I treat my neighbors. Everything becomes subsumed under Jesus' purposes for me. And if we see it this way, there is no such thing as retirement. We never ever down tools. Yeah, sometimes we have to change the way in which we live to be better stewards of our health. Some of our health, some of our health is not as good as some people, others. Maybe our financial limitations are different. There may be family relationships, aging parents that we have to look after. All those limitations are up to God, but we never down tools. And I want to read for you these two quotations about retirement that really helped me a lot. One, this was in a senior citizens home in Kelowna, BC when I was speaking. I just happened to pick it up. Since the turn of the century, 3 words have characterized retirement in the United States. This is an American speaking. Detachment, relaxation, and leisure. Let me read that again. Since the turn of the century, 3 words have characterized retirement in the United States. Detachment, relaxation, and leisure. Detachment depicts the release from responsibilities and obligations of career and work. Relaxation describes the manner and mode of living. Leisure is activity that is free from toil and strain, fills the time and occupies the attention. Hence, the main objective has been to change the retiree from a producer to a consumer in every aspect of life. Can I read that last sentence again? Hence, the main objective has been to change the retiree from a producer to a consumer in every aspect of life. This is the exact opposite of the Philippians text we're looking at. And then here is this other quotation from John Piper. He says, how many Christians set their sights on a Sabbath evening of life, resting, playing, traveling, the world's substitute for heaven? Their mindset is that we must reward ourselves in this life for the long years of labor. Eternal rest and joy after death is an irrelevant consideration. What a strange reward for a Christian to set his or her sights on. 20 years of leisure while living in the midst of these last days of infinite consequence for millions of unreached people. What a tragic way to finish the last lap before entering the presence of the King who finished his so differently. Can you look at that last line again? What a tragic way to finish the last lap before entering the presence of the King who finished his so differently. So that is why I say if we take the mindset of the Apostle Paul in Philippians 2, there is no retirement. Your ages that you're listening to me are ranging from your 40s to your 70s, okay? These are your Fammies and your Sammies, and I'm part of that group right now. I'm probably at one of the oldest ends of the spectrum. And so this is my encouragement for you. Take a second look. Change the way you have viewed your conversion. Some of you I know are going flat out for Jesus, which is great. Others of you may be coasting. Maybe you look backwards and said, I've kind of settled, I've done my duty. Maybe it's time to re-look, take a second look in your conversion. No, I'm not a servant, I'm a friend. I have been chosen, taken a hold of by Jesus. I have a purpose. He commissioned me for a fruitful life. And I press forward right to the very end, like a Michael Phelps at the very end. No retirement. He had to retire, but we don't retire. We just press forward as much as we can in order to accomplish the purposes for which he has taken hold of life. Subsuming everything under the overarching purpose. Not living a fragmented life, but an integrated life. Now for this, we're going to need help. I need help and you need help for this. So here are some things that I did in my 40s, 50s, and 60s that helped me maintain and is helping me now. I mentioned the quote from John Piper. John Piper was interesting. Many of you heard his name. John Piper and I are exactly the same age. He started at Bethlehem Baptist Church when I started at Rexdale Alliance Church. He retired 1 year before I did. After 35 years of ministry, I retired after 36 years of ministry. He's a theologically minded pastor, so am I. But there the similarities end. He's a magnificent writer, passionate preacher. For a very brief time in my life, the young people in my congregation persuaded me to try and do some tweeting. I gave up after a few days because there was so much stuff coming into my phone. I didn't want to follow all of that. But at the peak of my tweeting career, I had 12 people following me. John Piper had 400,000 people following him. So he was in a different league. But every Monday, which was our Sabbath, every Monday, or almost every Monday, my wife and I would sit and listen to a sermon of John Piper. My wife, why would I do that? Not in order to learn. Monday is a Sabbath day, right? You're not to be studying. That's true. But I have never known a man who in his preaching models worship. Because he calls preaching expository exaltation. That when you are preaching, expounding the scriptures, people need to know that you are deeply worshiping the person you are preaching. And I don't know any preacher. Others may preach better than him in some areas. Others may engage you more easily. But when it comes to exuding pure passion in preaching, that was him. So I listened to him on Monday, and that fired me all the way up for 6 more days to say, okay, God, let me at it. 6 more days to get back into the pulpit. And so he was a help for me to keep pressing forward in my primary call. Jesus took a hold of me for a primary purpose of teaching the word and studying the word. That became very clear within a week after I became a follower of Christ. And then there are 3 elders in our church. 2 of them are now in close to 90 years of age. One of them was a man named Frank Buchanan. He modeled for us what was to be a husband. His wife and then his second wife both died of cancer. And we saw the second one died of Lou Gehrig's disease. And he would care for them so beautiful, And so in my role as a husband, as a man who was commissioned to love for my wife and care for my wife, I don't know what our future will hold for us in the years to come. But Frank Buchanan's modeling was something that continues. Okay, I want to finish like he's finishing. And I never had to worry about being in prayer meeting alone ever, because no matter how few people came, I knew Frank Buchanan would be there, and I would never, ever be alone. That man's commitment and faithfulness to prayer. There was a period of time when he was the chairman of our elders board. He was also the janitor, the man who was cleaning up the church. No one would know if they met him cleaning and mopping the floors in the church that they were talking to the chairman of the board as well. That kind of humility that was modeled by him, he helped me with that. Then another man who's in his 80s right now, his name is John Neufeld. John modeled for me. He was a businessman, but John lived an integrated life. Even though he was a businessman and he did his business very, very well, every part of his life was subsumed in the Great Commission. He served all through that time on the boards of Christian universities, and after he retired, as an elder in our church, he would often devote 30, 40 hours a week because he loved the bride of Christ so much. And at the age of 78, he enrolled on a course studying the theology of Augustine. And so he was a man who has modeled for me loving the church and loving God with his mind. And then I think of a man named Ken Hassan Ali. Ken is from Trinidad and worshipped in our church, and I've known Ken for 55 years. Ken's about 7 or 8 years older than I am. And in his early 30s, Ken received, God called him and his wife to the mission field, but because of children and other commitments, he couldn't go. For 25 years, he kept that flame burning within his heart. And then finally, at the age of 60 or so, he and his wife both went, of all places, to Libya. And that was when Muammar Gaddafi was still in Libya. And they both were school teachers, so they went for a teaching job. But after their teaching was over, from 9 in the morning till 3 in the evening, they would teach. And then from 3 in the evening till 9 o'clock at night, they would teach the underground church. And they did this for 6 years in their late 60s, when they had earned their retirement, so to speak. And while he was in Libya, he met a Fulani gentleman, and the Fulanis were one of the unreached people groups, and we used to pray for the Fulanis regularly in our church, and Ken was part of them. He met a doctor from Senegal in Libya. And so Ken, after coming back and after stopping that ministry in Libya for other family reasons for 6 years, came back home, and he began to develop a passion to reach the Fulani in Senegal. And with the help and the blessing of the elders board of our church, Ken started making regular trips with Dr. So to the Fulanis. And this would be now in his mid-70s. Somewhere along the line, he had quadruple bypass open heart surgery as well. He recovered from that, and that didn't stop him. He has continued. And I got one time when he was on his first teaching assignment there, in his prayer letter, he wrote back, he said, while I was teaching here, I came into contact with people with pink eye. I got infected, and I taught most of Sunday morning with my eyes half closed and running with fluid. That's a man who's pressing forward. Any excuse to stop he could have had, but he said, no, I am not going to continue. And so these are people that I kept my eyes on to help me, because they were running the race ahead of me. They were pace setters for me. And so these were not they were not plaster saints. They were not people without faults. They had their faults. They had their problems. I knew them well. They knew my faults. I knew their faults. But they set at relentless pace for me, and I have kept my eyes on them. So some of you who are at the 70 end of the spectrum, I have this question for you. Who are you keeping your eyes on? Who are you hanging around with these days? People who have settled and are relaxing, or people who are stretching and who are pushing forward? We need people like that in our lives. Friends of ours who live in the Middle East and work in the Middle East told us about a 70-year-old friend of theirs. He used to mentor many younger men. And one time, several of the younger men that he mentored said, you got to come to us with this conference. We're all going to this conference on planning for the future. He was 70 years old. He said, I don't need to come to a seminar on planning for the future. They said, no, come. So at their insistence, he went. He was so gripped by what he heard, he came back and said to them, okay, I am 70 today. My father died at the age of 85. So I have to develop a 15-year plan because I might be alive for another 15 years. Well, he did. And he lived till 85. And you know what he did at 85? He said, I have an uncle who's 91. So I now have to develop a 6-year plan to go up to 91. Can you imagine the impact that man would have had on the younger generation that he was discipling? So that's my second question to you. Who are you keeping your eyes on that are pushing you forward? And who are the younger people that you are mentoring, that you are inspiring and setting the pace for? And those of you who are at the younger end of the spectrum, because the families are also the 40s, I'm told, you're the 40s and the 50s, you are just entering the 3 most important decades of your life. One of the stories my brother-in-law Ravi told me not too long ago was he learned, I forget where I think it was his book publisher who told him this. So I've not independently confirmed the truthfulness of this, but this is what this guy told him. He said, you know what are the 3 most productive decades of a person's life? So Ravi kind of guessed and said it was 50. 50 seems like a safe answer. You're kind of old enough to be mature. You got past all your youthful idiosyncrasies and maybe this. He said, no, your 50s are your 3rd most fruitful decade. Your 60s are your most fruitful decade, and your 70s are your 2nd most fruitful decade. So some of us Sannies are just entering the most fruitful decades of our life. This is no time to be sitting back and relaxing. This is a time to press forward. Now, I'm running out of time very quickly, but let me take the last 5 minutes to very, very quickly address the issue of motivation. What's going to keep us like this? You understand now what the Philippians text is talking about. We understand how we need to see ourselves as Jesus taking hold of us. We've seen the practical need of having help from those who are ahead of us and to help those who are coming after us. Well, what is the supreme motivation that's going to keep us? Very quickly, can you just put the next slide on? David in Psalm 27 says these words. One thing have I asked. Here's another one thing. Paul said, one thing I do, forgetting what is behind. Here's another one thing. One thing have I asked of the Lord that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. David understood that the foundational, fundamental motivation to keep on serving God is a glimpse of the beauty and the glory of Christ. That's why I love that song that the group sang before my message. Give me one pure and holy passion. Give me one magnificent obsession. It's not primarily a cause. Secondarily, it's a cause. Primarily, it is the glory of Jesus himself. Because as John Piper has written so eloquently, the glory of God is both the goal and the fuel of all ministry and mission. First of all, it is the goal because that's where we are heading towards. What did Jesus say in John chapter 15 when he was praying? If you really want to know what is important, you need to listen to a man's prayers just before he's dying. Because what we are thinking about when we are about to die is about obviously the most important. And the prayers that we are praying when we are about to die are obviously the most important thing in our lives, right? What was Jesus praying in the shadow of the cross? Father, I have finished the work you gave me. Now glorify me. Glorify me. You should read the number of times John 17 uses the word glory. And then he says this, I want everybody whom you have given to me to be with me so they might see my glory. The glory that I had with you before the foundation of the world. And then he also says, I want everybody, I'm not just praying for my disciples, I'm praying for everyone who's going to believe through me, which means you and me, all of us. What does Jesus want for us? He says, Father, glorify me, and I want everybody that I have seized and taken a hold of, I want them to be with me so they can see my glory. The glory of God and glory of His Son Jesus is the goal of everything. That's where we are headed. Revelation chapter 5, when history has reached its end, we see God on the throne, we see the Lamb on the throne, and we see people from every tribe, nation, and language gathered together singing glory to Him on the throne, glory to the Lamb. Wisdom, power, honor, blessing, glory, dominion be yours. So God's glory is the goal, but God's glory is also the fuel for us, because it is the only enduring motivation. A Puritan by the name of Thomas Chalmers shared a very crucial idea. He talked about something called the expulsive power of a competing affection. And John Piper put that in modern day language when he said, you never conquer desire by discipline or denial. You conquer desire by a stronger desire. And all of us know that from our lives, right? We don't really have a discipline problem because every one of us does what we want to do. Whatever I want to do. One of the best examples that I use, for example, is children, teenagers. You try to wake them up to go to church or whatever in the morning, they have a hard time. But they have no trouble staying up all night buying tickets for a favorite concert. Do they have discipline? Of course they have discipline. Do they have desire? No. Every one of us is the same thing. We always do what we want to do. Think about it very carefully. You always do what you want to do. Somebody asked Jonathan Edwards, who first articulated this, that's not right. If a robber sticks a gun in my head and says, give me your purse, I don't want to give him my purse, but I give it to him. He said, no, you want to live. And because you want to live, you give him your purse. We always do what we want to do. Our problem is never discipline. Our problem is desire. In the same way, we don't stay away from things that are not good, whether it's pornography or eating too much or wasting time or whatever it is that takes away. The problem is not discipline. The problem is not denial. You will not conquer desire by denial. You will conquer desire by a stronger desire. I mean, let's say, for example, you come home, you've been hungry, you haven't eaten for a while, and you open the fridge, and there's a leftover sandwich that is kind of left there, and you're about to bite it, when all of a sudden you walk into the kitchen and you see this beautiful aroma of tandoori chicken and fresh biryani coming to your mouth. What are you going to do? All of a sudden you lose your appetite for that bread. You just throw it out because something better is coming. That's the foundational principle from children to us as adults. It's a supreme motivation in life is pleasure, not pain. And when God's glory and Jesus' glory becomes our supreme joy, then we will choose, we will want to do the things that we ought to do. And that's what David said, one thing have I desired, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord and gaze upon the fair beauty of the Lord all the days of my life and seek Him in His temple. And so that's my desire. That's why the prayer that Moses prayed, show me your glory. The prayer that David prayed, I want to dwell in your house and see the fair beauty of the Lord, becomes the foundational prayer that we all need to pray. I want to close with this one thing. Well, the first one thing was from Philippians, one thing I do. David said, one thing I seek. And John Piper says, one thing the 9/11 terrorists got right. And with that, we finish. Can you put the last two slides up, please? Piper said this, the terrorists believed that the instant they died as murderers of infidels, quotes, the women of paradise would be waiting. Here's an excerpt from one of their notebooks. Purify your heart and clean it from all earthly matters. The time of fun and waste has gone. Those few hours that are left in your life are very few. From there, you will begin to live the happy life, the infinite paradise. Read Al-Tawbah and Anfal, war chapters from the Quran, and reflect on their meanings and remember all of the things that Allah has promised for the martyrs. Know that the gardens of paradise are waiting for you in all their beauty, and the women of paradise are waiting, calling out, come hither, friend of God. They are dressed in their most beautiful clothing. And then Piper makes his observation. The future is a very powerful thing, both false futures and true futures. God means for the true future to govern us. We should be controlled by what we believe about our future. Learn from the terrorists. Don't throw away your life on the American dream. fall in love with the final future glory. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Thank you so much. I've gone a few minutes over the time allotted to me, but I appreciate your kindness. It has been a wonderful pleasure and a privilege to join with you and to share these thoughts with you. Thank you once again.
Pastor Sunder Krishnan,